Elizabeth was walking alone in the gardens at Hunsford when she suddenly saw Mr. Darcy approaching. He looked serious, almost uneasy, but there was an intensity in his dark eyes that made Elizabeth stop in her tracks. "Miss Bennet," he said quietly, "I hope you will forgive my sudden intrusion, but I must speak with you." Elizabeth felt her heart quicken. "Mr. Darcy, what is this about?" He hesitated for a moment, then spoke with unusual passion. "You must know, I cannot keep my feelings hidden any longer. I have struggled against them, but I must declare it. I love you. I cannot imagine my life without you. Will you do me the honor of accepting my hand in marriage?" Elizabeth was shocked. Her cheeks flushed. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. "Mr. Darcy," she said, her voice firm but polite, I cannot accept you." Darcy looked stunned. "What? But do you not feel?" Elizabeth shook her head. "You have insulted my family and treated many people with pride. You interfered in Jane and Mr. Bingley's relationship. I cannot overlook these things, and I cannot accept you." Darcy's face fell, a mixture of anger and hurt flashing in his eyes. "You misunderstand me, Miss Bennet. I acted for Bingley's good because I believed it was right. My intentions were honorable." Elizabeth stepped back, her voice rising slightly. "Your intentions may have been honest in your own eyes, but your pride caused pain. I will not marry a man who treats others so." Darcy took a deep breath, trying to regain control. "I love you, Elizabeth. I admire your intelligence, your spirit, your wit. I cannot rest while you are unaware of my feelings." Elizabeth's eyes softened slightly, though she still shook her head. "I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Darcy, but I cannot accept. Perhaps in time, but not now. Your behavior cannot be ignored." Darcy's pride was wounded, yet his voice grew calmer. "Then I leave you with this. Know that my feelings are sincere, and that my admiration for you is greater than you imagine." He turned abruptly and walked away, leaving Elizabeth alone, her heart racing. She could not deny that part of her was moved by his words, but she remained firm in her refusal. As she continued her walk, Elizabeth reflected on the encounter. Darcy's proposal had been passionate and sincere, but it had been delivered with pride and harsh judgment. She realized she must remain cautious, yet she could not deny that her feelings toward him were becoming more complicated. By the time she returned to the house, Elizabeth was deep in thought. She wondered how this bold declaration would affect life at Hunsford, what Darcy's next move might be, and whether her own heart would ever allow her to forgive his past pride. The next morning, Elizabeth left the parsonage for an early walk, still unsettled by Darcy's proposal. The fresh air did little to calm her thoughts. She replayed every word of his declaration, every look on his face. Suddenly, she saw Mr. Darcy approaching along the path. His expression was grave but controlled. He bowed politely. "Miss Bennet," he said quietly, "I hope you will accept this." He held out a folded letter. Before she could answer, he walked away quickly, leaving her alone with the envelope. Elizabeth stared after him, her heart thudding. With trembling hands, she broke the seal and began to read. The letter was long and carefully written. At first, she hesitated. Her pride whispered she should toss it aside, but curiosity won. "Be not alarmed, madam, that I address you in this manner. I know my proposal offended you, but I cannot leave you without explaining my actions." Elizabeth read on, her eyes moving faster as the words unfolded. Darcy first spoke of Jane and Bingley. He admitted he had influenced Bingley to leave Netherfield. "I believed your sister's heart not seriously engaged," he wrote. "Her manner seemed calm, and your mother's open plans for a wealthy match alarmed me. I feared Bingley's happiness was at risk. I acted for his good, though perhaps I was mistaken." Elizabeth's cheeks flushed. He thought Jane felt nothing. He thought our family unworthy. Yet even as her anger rose, she could not deny that Jane's quiet nature might have misled him. Then came Wickham. Darcy's words were blunt, but full of emotion. "Mr. Wickham has deceived you. He was my father's godson and received generous support. But after wasting his inheritance, he demanded more. When refused, he attempted to elope with my young sister Georgiana to secure her fortune. I protected her honor and kept the matter private. His charming manners hide selfishness and vice." Elizabeth stopped walking, shocked. Wickham, kind, handsome Wickham, had tried to ruin a young girl's life? The story was too specific, too earnest to be a lie. She recalled little details that now seemed suspicious. Wickham's eagerness to blame Darcy, his quickness to speak ill of him. Doubt and shame crept into her heart. Darcy concluded, "I am not a man without faults. My pride has been my greatest failing, but I beg you to believe I never wished to hurt you or your family. I spoke as I felt, without disguise. May you think of me with less anger when time has softened your resentment." Elizabeth read the letter twice, then again. Her anger began to give way to confusion, then to regret. She remembered how readily she had believed Wickham's tale because it was flattering to her prejudice. She saw too how Darcy's pride had blinded him, but his love had been genuine. Sitting beneath a tree, Elizabeth whispered to herself, "Till this moment, I never knew myself." She folded the letter carefully and tucked it away. The world around her seemed changed. The birds still sang, the trees still swayed, but her own heart felt unsteady. Darcy was no longer simply the proud, disagreeable man she had rejected. He was a man of honor, mistakes, and deep feeling, and she, Elizabeth Bennet, was no longer so sure of her own judgment. As she walked slowly back to Hunsford, she knew this letter would stay with her forever. It had opened her eyes, and perhaps her heart. Elizabeth could not stop thinking about Darcy's letter. Even as she walked the quiet lanes near Hunsford, her mind replayed every sentence. At first, she had been angry at his proud proposal, angry at his interference with Jane and Bingley. But now, a new feeling crept in. Shame. She remembered how quickly she had believed Wickham's story, how easily she had laughed at Darcy's faults. "I was blind," she whispered. "I judged him without understanding him at all." Sitting beneath an old tree, Elizabeth took out the letter again. She read the part about Jane, how Darcy had thought her sister indifferent. It stung, but she could see how Jane's gentle manner might mislead a stranger. Then she thought of Wickham. She remembered the smooth way he had told his tale, his practiced charm, his eagerness to blame Darcy. Now she saw it. His easy smile had hidden selfishness. Darcy's account of Georgiana, so precise and full of feeling, rang true. Elizabeth closed her eyes. "Till this moment, I never knew myself," she murmured again. She had been proud of her quick judgment, her wit, her insight, but she had been wrong. She thought, too, of Darcy's declaration of love. Awkward, proud, but sincere. She had mocked him for his pride, yet her own prejudice had blinded her just as much. As she walked back to the parsonage, her feelings were mixed. Regret for her own blindness, gratitude for Darcy's honesty, and something warmer, something she did not yet dare to name. Elizabeth resolved that she would judge more carefully in the future. Pride and prejudice both had led her astray. She would not make the same mistake again. Elizabeth's final morning at Hunsford was bright and calm, but her heart was anything but steady. The days since receiving Darcy's letter had been filled with new thoughts, regrets, and a strange, uneasy hope. She knew she would see him one last time before leaving for home. At Rosings, Lady Catherine was in her usual commanding mood, offering Charlotte more opinions than conversation. Colonel Fitzwilliam was cheerful, but Elizabeth could see a hint of sympathy in his eyes. And then Mr. Darcy entered the room. Their eyes met briefly, just enough to make Elizabeth's breath catch. He bowed politely. She returned the gesture with equal formality. The group spoke of safe, ordinary things, the fine weather, the comfort of the roads, and Lady Catherine's opinions on carriages. Elizabeth said little, but she felt Darcy's gaze on her more than once. As the party prepared to depart, Darcy stepped forward. His voice was calm, yet there was a quiet emotion beneath it. "Miss Bennet," he said, "I hope you will have a safe journey. May your family be well." Elizabeth managed a small, genuine smile. "Thank you, Mr. Darcy, and I hope you will convey my regards to your sister when you return to Pemberley." There was a pause, just long enough for both of them to feel the weight of unspoken words. Then Darcy inclined his head. "I shall." Elizabeth curtsied. "Goodbye, sir." "Goodbye, Miss Bennet." And that was all. No mention of the proposal, no explanation, no new promises, just a polite farewell. Yet, as Elizabeth stepped into the carriage, she felt that something important had changed between them. As the wheels rolled away from Rosings, Elizabeth looked back once. Darcy was standing near the doorway, tall and still, watching until the carriage turned out of sight. She could not guess what he was thinking, but her own heart was full of quiet reflection. She whispered to herself, "This is not the end." Elizabeth's journey back to Longbourn felt lighter than she expected. The spring countryside was fresh and green, and the familiar sights of Hertfordshire filled her with warmth. After the tension and surprises of Kent, the thought of home seemed especially comforting. As the Bennet carriage approached the house, Elizabeth spotted Kitty and Lydia waiting excitedly by the gate. Lydia waved her bonnet in the air. "Lizzie, at last!" she cried. "We have been so bored without you." Kitty nodded eagerly. "Mamma has been talking of nothing but Mr. Bingley and weddings again." Elizabeth laughed. Some things never change. Inside the house, Mrs. Bennet greeted her daughter with dramatic affection. "My dear Lizzie, how thin you look! I am sure you are not properly fed at Hunsford. Lady Catherine must be a terrible hostess, but never mind, you are home now." Elizabeth smiled, kissed her mother's cheek, and reassured her. The familiar chaos of Longbourn, the clatter of servants, Lydia's giggles, her mother's chatter, was suddenly very dear to her. That evening, as the family sat together, Elizabeth found herself half listening to Lydia's endless stories of officers and Kitty's laughter. Jane's quiet, gentle presence beside her was a comfort. But her thoughts drifted back to Hunsford. Darcy's proud proposal, his heartfelt letter, Colonel Fitzwilliam's confession. Her feelings toward Darcy were no longer simple anger. There was admiration now, and confusion, and a strange new respect. She glanced around the room, the lively, noisy Bennet household she loved, and wondered how Darcy had seen them all through his proud, critical eyes. Perhaps I judged him as quickly as he judged us. As she prepared for bed that night, Elizabeth stood at her window, looking out at the moonlit fields of Longbourn. Home was unchanged, but she herself was not. The journey had altered her, softened her pride, sharpened her understanding. She whispered to herself, "Nothing will ever seem quite the same again." The morning after Elizabeth's return to Longbourn was quiet. Jane was sitting by the window with her sewing when Elizabeth entered. The younger sisters were out walking, and Mrs. Bennet was busy in the kitchen. At last, they were alone. Elizabeth closed the door softly. "Jane," she said, her voice low but urgent, "I have something important to tell you. It concerns Mr. Darcy and Mr. Wickham." Jane looked up in surprise. "Lizzie, what is it? You look serious." Elizabeth sat beside her and hesitated for a moment. "I must tell you the truth, though it may shock you. All that we and all of Meryton believed about Mr. Wickham, it is not as it seems." Jane's eyes widened. "Not as it seems?" Elizabeth took a deep breath and explained everything. Darcy's proposal, his letter, his reasons for separating Bingley and Jane, and most of all, Wickham's attempt to elope with Darcy's young sister, Georgiana. She repeated Darcy's words as faithfully as she could, though she softened the sharpest edges for Jane's gentle nature. When she finished, Jane sat in stunned silence. At last she whispered, "Poor Mr. Darcy! What he must have suffered! What his sister must have felt! And poor Mr. Wickham! I can hardly believe he could act so badly." Elizabeth gave a small, wry smile. "I believed him completely. I wanted to believe him because it flattered my dislike of Mr. Darcy. But now I see how foolish I was." Jane reached for her sister's hand. "Lizzie, you were misled by appearances. Wickham's manners are so charming that anyone might be deceived. And Darcy, I cannot think ill of him now after such an honest letter." Elizabeth nodded. "I misjudged him, and I misjudged myself. I have been proud, Jane, just as much as he." Jane's eyes softened. "We must forgive ourselves, Lizzie. We both know how easy it is to be wrong." Elizabeth squeezed her sister's hand. "There is more, Jane. Darcy believed you indifferent to Bingley. He thought he was protecting his friend." Jane's face grew a little pale, though she spoke quietly. "Then he acted from kindness, though it caused pain. I cannot resent him for that, even if he was mistaken." Elizabeth looked at her with admiration. "You are too good, Jane. I wish I had your heart." Jane smiled gently. "And I wish I had your spirit." The two sisters shared a long, thoughtful silence. Outside the window, the sun lit the fields of Longbourn, unchanged and peaceful. But for Elizabeth and Jane, the world had shifted. Misunderstandings had been cleared, pride had been humbled, and a new sense of understanding had begun to grow. The Bennet household was usually lively one morning when a letter arrived from Colonel Forster's wife. Lydia snatched it from the servant and opened it with a squeal of delight. "Listen to this," she cried, her eyes sparkling. "Mrs. Forster has invited me to Brighton for the summer. Imagine Brighton, the seaside, the parties, and all the officers." Kitty clapped her hands. "Oh, how wonderful! You must go, Lydia. You will have so much fun." Mrs. Bennet beamed. "What an honor for our family! Lydia, you will shine among the officers. Perhaps you will even find a husband." Elizabeth, however, felt a pang of unease. She knew her youngest sister's wild spirits, her flirting, and her thoughtless nature could easily lead to trouble. She spoke carefully, not wishing to embarrass Lydia in front of her mother. "Lydia, Brighton is not all amusement. You must behave properly and not bring shame on the family." Lydia rolled her eyes. "Oh, Lizzie, you always worry too much. I only mean to enjoy myself." Elizabeth later spoke privately with her father. "Papa," she said softly, "do you think it wise to let Lydia go? She is lively and careless, and without restraint she might do something foolish." Mr. Bennet chuckled. "She is silly but harmless. Let her go, she will tire herself out and perhaps learn some sense." Elizabeth frowned. "I fear she will learn nothing but vanity and imprudence." But Mr. Bennet would not be persuaded. "Do not distress yourself, Lizzie. A little Brighton mischief will do no lasting harm." Elizabeth said no more, but her heart was uneasy. As she watched Lydia dance around the room, chattering about gowns and officers, she could not shake the feeling that this trip to Brighton would change their lives in ways none of them expected. Summer arrived with warm skies and busy plans. Lydia's excitement over Brighton filled Longbourn, but Elizabeth had her own journey ahead. When her aunt and uncle, the Gardners, invited her to join their summer trip to Derbyshire, she eagerly agreed. "I should love to see the northern countryside," Elizabeth said. "I have heard it is the most beautiful part of England." Mrs. Gardner smiled. "We shall take our time and enjoy the sights. Perhaps we will visit some great houses along the way. There is one estate I have always wished to see, Pemberley. It is said to be magnificent." Elizabeth hesitated, her cheeks warming at the name. Pemberley, Darcy's home. But Mrs. Gardner continued, "Do not worry, Lizzie. We have heard Mr. Darcy is away for the summer." Elizabeth forced a light tone. "In that case, it would be harmless curiosity. I confess, I should like to see the place." The Gardners set out in their carriage with Elizabeth a week later. The journey north was delightful. Rolling hills, bright rivers, and peaceful villages passed by their windows. Elizabeth enjoyed her uncle's good humor and her aunt's gentle company, and for a while she let herself forget the confusion of Hunsford, Darcy's proposal, and Wickham's betrayal. One evening, as they stopped at an inn, Mr. Gardner studied a map. "We could reach Lambton tomorrow," he said. "It is not far from Pemberley." Mrs. Gardner looked at Elizabeth with a teasing smile. "Shall we go and see the famous grounds? It would be a pity to miss them." Elizabeth pretended to consider. "Very well. If Mr. Darcy is truly away, I see no harm in it. But we must promise not to mention his name to the servants. We will simply admire the scenery and be on our way." Inwardly, she felt a mix of nerves and curiosity. She wondered what kind of man owned such a grand estate, and whether Pemberley might reveal something of Darcy's true character. As the carriage rolled on the next morning, Elizabeth gazed out at the hills of Derbyshire, their slopes shining under the summer sun. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of excitement, not just for the journey, but for what she might discover about the man she thought she had understood, and now wasn't so sure she did. The next morning, bright and clear, the carriage rolled through winding lanes toward Pemberley. Elizabeth felt a nervous flutter in her chest. She told herself again there was nothing to fear. Mr. Darcy was away, and she was merely a curious traveler. When the carriage turned a corner and the great house came into view, even Elizabeth gasped. Before them stood a grand stone mansion, perfectly set on a gentle rise, with tall windows gleaming in the sun. The ground spread wide and green, with carefully kept gardens, flowing lawns, and ancient trees that cast soft shadows. A sparkling stream curved gracefully through the park, crossed by an elegant stone bridge. Mrs. Gardner whispered, "It is even finer than I imagined. What tasteful simplicity! So noble without being showy." Elizabeth could only nod. She had expected grandeur, but not this perfect harmony between house and nature. It seemed, she thought, exactly what a sensible, generous man would create. And the thought unsettled her. As they walked the paths, admiring flowers and trees, Mr. Gardner added, "There is a natural beauty here. Nothing seems forced. Whoever owns such a place must be a man of excellent character." Elizabeth felt her cheeks warm. She remembered her former Prejudice and Wickham's stories. Could she have been so wrong? They entered the house, guided by a polite housekeeper. The interior was just as impressive, elegant but not ostentatious. Beautiful paintings lined the walls, many of Darcy's ancestors, and several fine landscapes. In the gallery, Elizabeth stopped before a portrait of Mr. Darcy himself. The painting showed him calm, dignified, and strikingly handsome. Elizabeth's heart gave a strange little jump. The expression in his eyes seemed softer than she remembered, less proud, more thoughtful. The housekeeper, noticing her interest, spoke warmly. "Mr. Darcy is the kindest, most generous landlord I have ever known. He is greatly loved by all his tenants." Mrs. Gardner looked surprised. "He is not proud or harsh, then?" "Proud? Oh, no, madam. He may seem reserved, but I have never known a better master. He is always fair and considerate." Elizabeth listened in silence, her earlier judgments echoing painfully in her mind. She had thought him arrogant and selfish, yet here, in his own home, he was spoken of as a man of integrity and kindness. When they stepped outside again, Elizabeth paused on the terrace to take one more long look at the house, its windows shining in the sunlight. A quiet admiration grew in her heart, mixed with regret. She whispered to herself, "To be mistress of Pemberley might not be so terrible after all." And though she laughed softly at her own thought, she could not shake the image of Mr. Darcy, the proud man she had rejected, standing beside her on that terrace, master of all he surveyed, and perhaps of her own restless heart. The next morning, Elizabeth and the Gardners returned to Pemberley at Mr. Darcy's polite invitation. Elizabeth felt both nervous and curious. She had seen a new, more gracious side of Darcy the day before, and now she would meet his family. As they entered the elegant drawing room, Darcy rose to greet them. Beside him stood a tall, fair-haired young woman of about 16. She was lovely, with gentle eyes and a modest manner. Darcy spoke warmly. "Miss Bennet, may I present my sister, Georgiana?" Georgiana curtsied gracefully. "I am very pleased to meet you, Miss Bennet." Her voice was soft, almost timid. Elizabeth smiled, sensing her shyness. "The pleasure is mine, Miss Darcy. Your home is the most beautiful I have ever seen." A faint blush colored Georgiana's cheeks. "Thank you. My brother takes great care of it." As they sat, Mrs. Gardner joined the conversation, speaking kindly to Georgiana about music and travel. Soon, Georgiana relaxed a little. Her sweetness and innocence were plain to see. Elizabeth noticed Darcy watching his sister fondly, his usual reserve softened by affection. At one point, Georgiana turned to Elizabeth with quiet eagerness. "My brother has spoken of you often," she said. She stopped, glancing shyly at Darcy. Darcy's eyes flickered with amusement and perhaps embarrassment. "He hoped I spoke with respect," he said lightly. Elizabeth, slightly flustered, replied with a playful smile. "I shall assume you did, Mr. Darcy." The moment passed, but Elizabeth felt her heart warm. Georgiana's gentle nature and Darcy's tenderness toward her revealed yet another side of the man she had misjudged. As they left, Mrs. Gardner whispered to Elizabeth, "She is a dear girl, and how attentive Darcy is to her. He does not seem the proud, distant man you once described." Elizabeth could only nod, her thoughts spinning. Each new encounter at Pemberley was making her feelings for Darcy more complicated and perhaps more hopeful. The next day at Pemberley, Elizabeth and the Gardners again joined Darcy, Georgiana, and Bingley in the drawing room. Miss Bingley was also there, dressed elegantly and watching Elizabeth with sharp, measuring eyes. Miss Bingley forced a smile. "Miss Bennet, I hope your family is well. I hear Meryton can be rather provincial. It must be refreshing for you to see a real estate like Pemberley." Elizabeth returned the smile calmly. Indeed, Pemberley is very beautiful, but I have always thought true happiness depends more on good company than fine surroundings. Bingley laughed warmly at this, and Darcy's eyes flickered with approval. Miss Bingley's lips tightened. She tried again, her voice smooth but edged. Do you still enjoy long country walks? I suppose the simple pleasures must seem dull after seeing such grandeur. Elizabeth answered with a light laugh. On the contrary, Miss Bingley, the simplest pleasures often remain the sweetest. Miss Bingley then turned her attention to Darcy. Do you remember, Mr. Darcy, how dreadful the last assembly at Meryton was? I cannot imagine how you endured it. Darcy's expression cooled. I thought it quite tolerable, especially as it allowed me to meet Miss Bennet. The room grew silent for a moment. Miss Bingley flushed slightly, but forced another brittle laugh. Elizabeth looked down, her heart racing. Darcy had openly defended her. When the Gardiners later took their leave, Elizabeth reflected on Darcy's quiet but unmistakable support. Each small gesture was changing her feelings for him, piece by piece. The following morning, Elizabeth was walking with the Gardiners when a servant brought her an urgent letter from Longbourn. She opened it quickly, her hands trembling as she read Jane's familiar handwriting. My dearest Lizzie, the letter began, something dreadful has happened. Lydia has run away with Wickham. Elizabeth stopped in her tracks, her breath catching. She read on. Lydia had left Brighton secretly with Wickham. No one knew if they were even married. The Bennet family feared disgrace and ruin. Elizabeth's face turned pale. The Gardiners hurried to her side, alarmed. What is it? Her aunt asked. Elizabeth handed her the letter with shaking hands. Lydia, she has run away with Wickham. Oh, what folly, what shame this will bring upon us all. Her mind raced with images of Lydia's reckless behavior and Wickham's smooth, deceitful smile. She felt sick with dread, not just for her sister's reputation, but for the future of the entire family. We must return to Longbourn at once, Mr. Gardiner said firmly. Your father will need our help. Elizabeth nodded, struggling to keep her composure. She thought of Darcy, how Wickham's true nature had been revealed to her through him, and how her family's scandal might now humiliate her further in his eyes. As the carriage was prepared for their hurried departure, Elizabeth stood for a moment on the grounds of Pemberley, the beautiful house shining in the distance. Just yesterday, her heart had felt light with new possibilities. Now it was heavy with fear and shame. She whispered to herself, this changes everything. The Gardiners' carriage sped toward Longbourn, but inside, the atmosphere was heavy with worry. Elizabeth sat pale and silent, staring out at the passing fields. Her aunt gently broke the silence. My dear Lizzie, Mrs. Gardiner said softly, this is serious, but we must not lose hope. Perhaps they are already married. Elizabeth shook her head. Wickham has neither money nor honor. I fear he never intended marriage. Lydia's thoughtlessness may destroy us all. Mr. Gardiner, usually calm and cheerful, frowned deeply. The Bennet name will be ruined if Wickham abandons her. Your younger sister's chances of marriage would be nearly impossible. Society is cruel when it comes to scandal. Elizabeth swallowed hard. And it is all Lydia's foolishness, and my own. I knew Wickham's true character after Darcy's letter. I should have warned my family. Mrs. Gardiner placed a comforting hand on hers. Lizzie, you are not to blame. It is Wickham's wickedness and Lydia's vanity. Elizabeth nodded, but remained troubled. She thought of Darcy, of how Wickham's disgrace would now seem tied to her family in his eyes. A painful sense of shame settled over her. When they reached Longbourn, Jane met them at the door, her face anxious but composed. Jane said quietly, "Mama is in hysterics. She cannot speak of anything but Lydia. Papa has gone to London. I fear for him. He seemed so shaken." The Bennet family was indeed in crisis, their happiness shattered by one impulsive act. In London, Mr. Bennet began the grim task of searching for his youngest daughter. He called on every contact he could think of, visiting taverns, officers' lodgings, and every place Wickham might hide. At Longbourn, Elizabeth and Jane waited anxiously for news. Mrs. Bennet alternated between wailing over Lydia's lost prospects and imagining her triumphant return as Mrs. Wickham. Kitty, frightened and guilty, whispered that perhaps she had encouraged Lydia too often. Elizabeth confided to Jane one evening, "If Papa cannot find them, I do not know what will become of us. Our family will be shunned. Even Charlotte and her family may wish to avoid us." Jane, ever hopeful, said quietly, "We must trust in Providence. Perhaps Mr. Bennet will succeed, or Wickham may do what is right in the end." Meanwhile, Mr. Bennet's efforts continued day after day, but with little progress. London was vast, Wickham was cunning, and Lydia was thoughtless. The search grew more desperate, the danger to the Bennet family's reputation more real with every passing hour. A week of anxious waiting finally ended when a letter arrived from Mr. Gardiner. Elizabeth's hand shook as she read it aloud to Jane. "Lydia and Wickham have been found in London," she said breathlessly. "They are living together in shabby lodgings. Wickham has agreed to marry Lydia if certain financial arrangements are made." Jane clasped her hands in relief. "Oh, thank heaven, she will be married and the family's honor saved." Elizabeth felt a mixture of relief and shame. But what a disgraceful bargain this is. Wickham demands money, not marriage for love. Still, it spares Lydia and us all from ruin. Later, Mrs. Bennet rejoiced loudly. "My Lydia will be married! I knew it would all turn out well." She began planning gowns and parties, forgetting the scandal of the past days. Elizabeth, however, saw only Wickham's selfishness and her family's narrow escape. Another letter from Mr. Gardiner soon arrived, revealing the full price of Wickham's honor. He had insisted on the payment of his debts and the promise of a small annual income. Mr. Bennet frowned as he read. How could Gardiner afford all this? He must have spent a great deal to persuade Wickham. Elizabeth said quietly, "I fear he has done it for our sake. Papa, you must repay him somehow." Mrs. Bennet, on the other hand, was unconcerned. "What matters is that Lydia will be married. Wickham will be our son-in-law and everything is proper again. Oh, how fine it will be to see her as Mrs. Wickham." Elizabeth exchanged a worried glance with Jane. They both knew Wickham was not a worthy husband, and their uncle had taken on a heavy burden to save them. A few weeks later, the newlyweds arrived at Longbourn. Lydia swept into the room with pride, wearing a bright new gown and smiling as if she were a queen. "Well, Mamma, I am married at last," she declared, "and I am sure you are all envious. Brighton was such fun, and Wickham looked so handsome in his regimentals." Mrs. Bennet fussed over her. "My dearest child, you look radiant. What a fine thing it is to have you settled." Lydia, oblivious to the shame she had caused, boasted about her adventures. "You all must come to visit us. Wickham and I will be the happiest couple in the world." Later, as she chattered to Elizabeth, Lydia accidentally let slip, "And wasn't it kind of Mr. Darcy to be at our wedding?" Elizabeth froze. "Mr. Darcy? At your wedding?" Lydia's eyes widened. "Oh, I wasn't supposed to say anything. But yes, he was there. He arranged so much." She quickly changed the subject, but Elizabeth's heart raced. Could it be that Darcy whom she had once rejected, had quietly intervened to save her family? The realization filled her with awe and gratitude.
A few days after Lydia and Wickham departed, Elizabeth received a letter from Mrs. Gardiner. Sitting alone in her room, she opened it eagerly and with growing astonishment read the truth. Mrs. Gardiner explained that Darcy had quietly found Wickham, paid his debts, and persuaded him to marry Lydia. He had done it not for Wickham, nor even for Lydia, but for Elizabeth herself. Elizabeth's hands trembled as she finished the letter. She walked to the window, staring at the late summer fields outside Longbourn. Darcy, the man she had once dismissed as proud and unfeeling, had acted with generosity, risking his own reputation to save her family. Tears pricked her eyes. "How wrong I was about him," she whispered. Her admiration for Darcy deepened into something warmer, something she dared not yet name. The Bennet family soon heard delightful news. Mr. Bingley had returned to Netherfield. Mrs. Bennet could hardly contain herself. "Oh, Jane, he has come back for you, I am certain of it." Jane blushed but tried to remain calm. "We must not be too hopeful, Mamma. Perhaps he has returned only for shooting or to visit friends." But Elizabeth noticed a spark of hope in her sister's eyes. She too felt a secret excitement. If Bingley returned, Darcy would surely follow. Within days, Bingley visited Longbourn with Darcy at his side. The room filled with polite conversation and warm smiles. Elizabeth's heart beat faster as Darcy greeted her with quiet kindness. There was no awkwardness now, only a gentle respect between them. A dinner invitation soon followed. Bingley and Darcy came to Longbourn, and the evening was filled with subtle glances and unspoken feelings. Mrs. Bennet, in her excitement, could hardly speak without praising Bingley or teasing Jane. Bingley, blushing but happy, stayed close to Jane's side, clearly enchanted by her every word. Darcy, meanwhile, sat across from Elizabeth. Their conversation was polite, but held a quiet intimacy. They spoke of Derbyshire's scenery, of books and music, of simple things, but each small exchange seemed meaningful. At one point, Elizabeth caught Darcy watching her with a softened gaze. He quickly looked away, and she felt her cheeks warm. When the gentlemen departed, Mrs. Bennet declared triumphantly, "I shall be very surprised if Jane is not engaged soon." Elizabeth smiled privately, but in her heart she wondered about Darcy, his steady gaze, his quiet voice, and the growing certainty that her feelings for him had changed entirely. The Bennet household awoke to a bright morning filled with nervous excitement. Mr. Bingley had been visiting more and more often, and Mrs. Bennet could barely contain her anticipation. That afternoon, Bingley arrived and asked for a private word with Jane. The family pretended not to watch as the pair stepped into the garden. Elizabeth, peeking discreetly through the window, saw Bingley take Jane's hand and speak honestly. Jane's cheeks glowed with happiness as she nodded, and Bingley's face lit with joy. When they returned, Jane's smile said everything. Mrs. Bennet squealed with delight, rushing to embrace them both. "My dearest Jane, my sweetest Mr. Bingley, what joy you have brought us all." Elizabeth hugged her sister warmly. "I am so very happy for you, Jane. You both deserve every happiness." Jane whispered, still glowing, "I am the happiest creature alive." A few days later, an unexpected carriage stopped at Longbourn. To everyone's surprise, Lady Catherine de Bourgh stepped out, her proud expression unsoftened by travel. Elizabeth greeted her politely and led her into the sitting room. Lady Catherine wasted no time. "Miss Bennet," she said sharply, "I have come on a matter of great urgency. It has reached my ears that you may aspire to marry my nephew, Mr. Darcy. Such a union is impossible. You must promise never to accept him." Elizabeth, though startled, remained calm. "I am not engaged to Mr. Darcy, my lady, but if I were, I would not feel obliged to follow such an order." Lady Catherine's eyes widened in outrage. "Do you know who you oppose? His family, his fortune, his engagement to my daughter has long been planned." Elizabeth's voice was steady. "Mr. Darcy is free to choose his own happiness, and I will not promise anything against my own." Lady Catherine glared, then rose. "I am most seriously displeased," she declared, before sweeping from the room. Elizabeth, though shaken, felt proud. She would not be intimidated, no matter how powerful the opponent. Later that evening, Elizabeth sought out Jane in their shared room. The day's tension still hung over her. "Jane," she began quietly, "Lady Catherine came today, uninvited. She demanded I refuse any offer from Mr. Darcy." Jane looked startled. "How shocking! And what did you say?" Elizabeth smiled faintly. "I refused her promise anything. But Jane, what must he think of my family now? Lydia's disgrace, Lady Catherine's anger. Perhaps he will never forgive it." Jane reached for her sister's hand. "If he truly cares for you, Lizzie, none of that will matter. Darcy is a man of honor. I believe he will act according to his own heart." Elizabeth nodded, but her heart remained uncertain. Still, a small hope glimmered within her, a hope that Darcy's feelings for her had not changed.
Elizabeth was walking in the garden at Longbourn when she saw Darcy approaching. Her heart beat faster. His serious expression reminded her of their last difficult meeting. He stopped and bowed slightly. "Miss Bennet, I came to thank you for your kindness to my sister. But also, if you will allow me, to speak again on a subject we discussed before." Elizabeth's breath caught. "You wish to speak of the past?" "Yes," he said, his voice softer now. "My feelings are unchanged, but one word from you will silence me forever." Elizabeth's cheeks flushed. "My feelings are very different from what they were then. You are too generous to trifle with. Your actions, your care for Lydia, for my family, have shown your true character." Darcy's eyes brightened with hope. "Then you will accept me?" She smiled, her heart light. "Yes, most willingly." For the first time, Darcy let himself smile fully. The pride and tension between them melted away, leaving only joy. Later, in the privacy of their room, Elizabeth told Jane everything: Darcy's secret help with Lydia's marriage and his quiet generosity. Jane was astonished. He did all that without seeking any credit? Elizabeth nodded. "He asked my Uncle Gardner to take the praise. I misjudged him terribly, Jane. He is a man of honor." Jane's gentle eyes filled with tears. "Lizzie, I am so glad. Now I know you will truly be happy with him. He must love you very deeply to have done so much." In the days that followed, Elizabeth and Darcy walked together often, speaking openly of the misunderstandings that had kept them apart. "I was proud and foolish," Darcy admitted. "I thought too highly of my own judgment." "And I was prejudiced," Elizabeth said, smiling. "I let Wickham's charm blind me, and my vanity made me believe the worst of you." He took her hand gently. "Perhaps we were both blind, but our mistakes led us here." Elizabeth's eyes sparkled. "Yes, they taught us what love truly is: patience, humility, and understanding." Winter melted into a bright spring, and Longdern buzzed with excitement. Jane and Elizabeth stood together in their wedding dresses, their faces glowing with happiness. Mr. Bingley could hardly take his eyes off Jane, his joy as open as his heart. Darcy, though more reserved, looked at Elizabeth with quiet adoration that spoke louder than words. The ceremony was simple, but full of love. Mrs. Bennet wept loudly with joy, while Mr. Bennet whispered witty remarks to keep from becoming sentimental. Afterward, as the couples prepared to leave for their new homes, Jane and Bingley to Netherfield, Elizabeth and Darcy to Pemberley, the Bennet family gathered around. Elizabeth glanced at her sister, and then at Darcy. Her heart was light and sure. Against all odds, Pride and Prejudice had led them to happiness. The two sisters drove away, each secure in love, friendship, and a bright future, proof that even the proudest hearts can be humbled and the strongest prejudices overcome. And that's the end of our journey through Pride and Prejudice. 2 sisters, 2 weddings, and plenty of lessons about pride, prejudice, and the surprises of love. Do you think Darcy and Elizabeth would have found each other if they hadn't made so many mistakes? Or did those mistakes actually make their love stronger? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more English stories adapted just for you. See you in the next video.